the gutter is there waiting for us. The gutter is beckoning us, and the gutter is closer than we think. And that is painful, and that is terrible suffering, which we want to avoid. So we do need to kind of get it together. But there's a difference between ambition and imperative. An imperative is something I suggest is really important if you want to avoid something real in this world, which is pain. And if you want to avoid as much suffering as possible. Now, of course, pain and suffering are just part of life, but you can inflict them upon yourself by not, if you like, playing a game. And, things are really, really hard now and very difficult. And you're maybe wondering, why am I struggling? Why am I poor? And it's nothing to do with you or me. It's a structural issue largely, and I'm going to talk a lot about that probably in my next podcast or video. And right now, just want to talk a little bit more about the imperative rather than the ambition. I think we should forget about ambition. I think it's just a waste of time. But I do think we should think very much about imperative. What is imperative? Well, let me start by saying that you can actually be quite well off in the 1980s on almost nothing, and the 70s to a great extent. I remember when I was a student in about 1988 or something, and we had an apartment on a student grant, which was £3,000, which is about $4,000 a year, and we had an apartment overlooking the River Thames in Putney. We used to drink every day. We spent a lot of time pursuing creative arts. I was in a band at the time, and pretty much everyone I knew was either in a band or doing something quite interesting, and they were actually funding this on pretty much air. Things were much cheaper. You could have a pint, you could have your tobacco, you could go to the cinema, you could go out for a pizza. It was all possible, even on a student grant, which is absolutely nothing. It was not hard to meet people. It wasn't hard to meet women. This was the pre-digital revolution, and so we were in pubs, we were in clubs, we were in bars. We were out and about, and of course we were students as well, which helped. Energy bills were pretty low back then, and of course, if you did get into a bit of trouble, if you had maybe a summer where you couldn't kind of find a job. Jobs were quite plentiful because you could always get a job, and there was factories, there was warehouse, there was clerical work. It was a much easier life in many respects, and it's totally different now. I mean, I know because I've got children who are that age now, and I know how tough it is. And if you did get into trouble, there was a kind of welfare safety net, which wasn't utterly humiliating, and was quite easy to access in many ways. So I want to tell you the story about a guy called Felix Dennis. And the thing about Felix Dennis is that he was going way back to the late 60s and early 70s. He was a kind of hippie guy. You might have heard of him. I mean, he's dead now. But he was a kind of hippie guy who was He was a prolific kind of, well-known member of the sort of hippie counterculture at the time, and he had a sort of anarchistic magazine called Oz, and he was just, I suppose, like many people back then, he was just kind of, living on the edge a little bit, didn't have any cash, but he was, quite active culturally and producing this counterculture magazine. And of course, in those days, there was a thing called moral panics all of the time. We still have them today. For anyone who's interested, Stanley Cohen wrote a good book about this called Folk Devils and Moral Panics. Now, there was moral panic about cannabis, for example, so cannabis would destroy the world. There was a moral panic about men with long hair. Moral panics about, sort of strange fashion, then the moral panics about the punks, and moral panics about young people, not behaving themselves. And he got caught up in one of these moral panics and actually was prosecuted with conspiracy to sort of corrupt. And this was very, very common at the time. People who were involved in the counterculture who were doing sort of cutting-edge satire, if you like, were prosecuted, were hounded by the police. It famously happened to Genesis P. Orridge of Psychic TV and Throbbing Gristle, that band, and he was a member of an arts collective and was basically hounded out of the UK and sort of had to hide in America for a long time. It was a very strange time. Of course, it's a very strange time now, but it was a different strange time back then. So Felix Dennis, this kind of hippie guy, was hounded and subject to prosecution, and in fact, this trial became one of the longest in legal history. And the result was this guy who became extremely sceptical about authority and became very sceptical about how he was going to survive this world, being himself in effect, and doing the sort of things he wanted to do. And he realized, he had a realization that the only thing that could insulate him from this harassment was money. And that's what this is all about. He thought that he needed to get rich in order to protect himself from this kind of unpleasant sort of persecution, prosecution, aggro from the state. And so he set about building huge amounts of wealth, and he did it quite slowly. He started publishing other types of magazines. He was right there at the sort of forefront of computing, and with producing computer magazines. He then went on to produce sort of one of very successful men's magazine, Maxim, sort of men's interest magazine like GQ is now, and car magazines and such like. And he did this sort of, by being very much ahead of the curve in trends. But the point was that he made enough money that he was able to insulate himself from that time when he was a very happy young man, hippie, except the police and the authorities and the people who like to kind of exacerbate sort of moral panics and direct them towards and have enemies. He managed to insulate him from all of that, and he was not driven by he really didn't have a love of money. It was nothing to do with that, but he had a desire to be independent, to be free, and not to be at the mercy of the state apparatus, because the state apparatus can be quite cruel. There's no doubt about that. Okay, so what's the point? How can we learn from Felix Dennis? Well, the thing is that, as I said before, I don't think sort of ambition for sort of large amounts of money like Felix Dennis is necessarily going to lead to any great happiness. But what is going to lead to a lot of great pain is being poor. I told you at the beginning of this video that actually when I was what you'd call poor in London back in the 80s and early 90s, didn't feel like being poor. Actually, I felt like being quite wealthy. None of the things I described, the flat and the ability to go and have a pizza and the ability to pursue these creative things and make money from them as well, gigging in pubs, all of those things, and being able to just get work when you needed it. We just wanted a job for 3 months, so you could find one. It's all gone. It's all gone now. And there is no safety net either. The safety net is punitive, difficult to enter, and quite humiliating. And also, it's getting smaller and smaller and narrower and narrower. And as increasingly right-wing policies become mainstream, the safety net is also shrinking, the safety net that we built after the Second World War. So what I would say is that instead of bothering with great ambitions, just think of the imperative. And the imperative is that you do not want to be at the mercy of these institutions if you can help it, because it's cruel. They are cruel, and life just becomes incredibly miserable. So, you know, the idea is to, you know, to think, how is it that I can elevate myself, not with big dreams and not with fanciful ideas. You know, that's all well. Have those at the weekend, but get yourself in a situation where you are above the fray of the sort of things that that will happen to you if you're in poverty, having to deal with social services and having to deal with unemployment services and having to deal with these things is really unpleasant and painful. And, you know, you've got a lifetime in which to organise it. It doesn't matter whether you've organised it at 50 or 60. It is a question of just elevating yourself above above that level whereby you have to interact with those kind of services. Now, I suppose I mean, this sounds obvious, but actually I think to a lot of people it's not. They have very big visions and very big ambitions, which I don't think actually bring them a great deal of happiness. But on the other end of the scale, you know, if you are earning if you're not earning enough to bring yourself up to a sort of minimum where you can avoid interaction with these kind of authorities, then there is a sense in that in freedom. There is a sense in that in independence. And you do not feel that you're at the mercy of these authorities and bodies which will demand of you things which will make your life very uncomfortable. That's what they're designed to do. They're designed to make your life extremely uncomfortable. Now, this, of course, is easier said than done, because structurally we have put ourselves into a situation where there is no, for a lot of people, there is no work. And it's impossible to find paid work. And we live in a world now of the working poor, where people are working hard, full-time, in very reasonable jobs, like, for example, in nursing, or in, working full-time in retail, where you cannot actually afford to rent somewhere. It depends where you live, of course, but this is generally across Europe and the States. You will be spending, if you can find somewhere to rent that's reasonable, you might be spending 60% of your net income on rent, and leaves you, by the time you've paid your energy bills, which can be 250, 300 euros a month if you're not lucky, if you're unlucky, and water bills and your food bills, and your transport costs, you've got absolutely nothing left by week 3, and you're working a full-time job. So what I'm suggesting is not easy. Now, why should it be easy? It isn't easy. All I'm saying, though, is if you forget about the big picture and the big ideas, all right, and don't drift around hoping that, that you're going to sort of, make a million. Who cares about whether you make a million or not? There's no salvation in making a million, but there is salvation in being above the fray and the noise of utter poverty. And that is a terrible, terrible place to be. And I think a lot of people I've known have kind of not realised that there is so much, like freedom is, there's no such thing as freedom actually, okay? But we know roughly what we mean by being free. We have a sense of it. I mean, nobody wanders around the earth being free. I mean, we are cursed by our animal nature. Of course, we're not free. We will always have desires which are unquenched, and we will have unrequited loves, and we will never be free. Too much choice, of course, is an absolute burden in itself. But we have a sense of what we mean by freedom at that lower level. It kind of means that we don't have a big pile of letters coming through every day from all these agencies saying, have you applied for this work? Have you done this? You have not satisfied us that you have fulfilled you've got the right to claim X, Y, and Z, you know, and then you worry about how am I going to pay this? How am I going to get food on the table? That is not freedom. And I think that if people focus and concentrate on the imperative, and it'll be different wherever you are, but you know roughly what the imperative is. For example, the imperative where I am is not very much. It's about $1,500 or €1,500 a month. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but you know, it does give you no. I never get any. You don't get any letters. You don't get any letters. You can just about afford everything. And you've got this little sense of freedom that you can, as long as you're happy to do things which don't cost a lot of money, then that's okay. Certainly you've got some independence. You've got independence from the state. You don't have to fulfill any requirements because you're on benefits. Now, I know this isn't easy for everyone because of the structural problems which have meant that since 1970, it's been we have completely messed up the system to the point where there are whole swathes of the land where there is no available work. But the point is, this isn't something you can do in a moment or in a day or in a week or in a month, maybe not even in a year. But I think the key is to if you put your energy into that as a principle, rather than the principle of sort of thinking that you can spend 100,000, you know, I want to spend 100,000 on my wedding, I want to spend 100,000 on my car, I want to spend 800,000 on the house. From my experience, none of these things actually bring very much pleasure. They seem to from afar, but once you're there, as I said, in the picture, then it ain't quite the same. I got a story about, kind of slightly related to it, which is a friend of mine, Clodagh, who she got married, and they had one of those big weddings at one of those big manor houses, cost tens of thousands, big manor house, 200 guests or more, and actually they were flown away for the wedding to go to their honeymoon or whatever in a helicopter, and the helicopter landed, and she and her new husband got into the helicopter. And as the helicopter took off, and there was the fucking chateau, and all her friends were waving, she started crying. Tears were rolling down her face. And she told me, she said, they weren't tears of happiness. She said, it was the moment that I realised I didn't want this. Well, okay, so she'd been building up to that for 6 months. So what if you've been building up a business? Because you want the car, you want the big wedding, you want the house. What if you've been building up a business for 30 years and then you get there and you realise there's nothing there? That's, you know, I would focus, if you're an ordinary person like me, a normal person, and it's tough and it's a struggle, I would focus on the imperative. I don't want to see anybody in pain. I don't want to see anyone suffering. I don't want to see anybody with bills and things they can't, that's eating away at them, okay? And I think we need to shift our perspective on what can give us independence, freedom, and get away from being at the mercy of these authorities. It isn't something that I think most of us can achieve that. I mean, the other story I would give is those people who've had dreams. I mean, what's wrong with having a dream? It's a wonderful thing, but you know, there is something to be said for keeping the dreams for the weekend, because I mean, I know so many people who have wanted to be entrepreneurs and have wanted to start their own business, and it's kind of like a sickness, because running your own business is just hell on earth for most people. I mean, it's just. It never leaves you. There's no money in it for a long time, and 9 out of 10 times, from my experience, those businesses don't work. They don't last. You know, so you know, I would never turn my nose up at a kind of, you know, a job that provides the sort of income, at least for a while, that can take you to that what I call that imperative point, where you have escaped the agony of dependence. So, all right, so, you know, I would never turn my nose up at a kind of, you know, a job that provides the sort of income, at least for a while, that can take you to that what I call that imperative point, where you have escaped the agony of dependence. So, all right, so, you know, I would never turn my nose up at a kind of, you know, a job that provides the sort of income, at least for a while, that can take you to that what I call that imperative point, where you have escaped the agony of dependence. So, all right, so So I guess what I'm really saying is that I think if you focus on something as simple as that and stop undermining that, because we live in a world which has completely glorified wealth and a kind of mythical lifestyle. You know, you see it, 10,000 times a day as you're flicking around on your phone or whatever, or you're watching The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. And so it's just a complete myth. Okay, you don't want any of that, you know. Well, if you do, that's fine. But my experience is that actually there's very little to be said for that. And that for, 99 out of 100 people, it ain't going to happen anyway. But by being a little bit more humble, by being a little bit more realistic, by not falling for these myths and these stories, you can get out from the agony, pain, and suffering of absolute bloody poverty. And if it takes sort of getting rid of the dream of owning the Ferrari and replacing that with the energy to just get yourself in that nice position where you're not dependent, it's an amazing feeling. The rest of it should, come together. But I realise that we live in a very, very, very tough world. And this is even something that should be simple is actually, to some people, feels not even achievable. Now, the reasons that we have been sold down the river since in the last 50 years, and so things have been so tough. And it's not any particular person or government that's done this. It's just, I suppose, what you call it is a perfect storm of events which have caused it, and this is why we are turning to extreme leaders because we are looking for someone to blame. We're blaming completely the wrong people. We're blaming the institutions which are absolutely essential. We're blaming socialist ideas, which is not helpful. We're blaming immigration, of course. Now, it's true that the swelling of population in some areas causes a sort of deficit in infrastructure. But, we didn't build houses. We didn't build homes. And as I said, it's a big question. I'm going to talk about that in my next video.